Oh, hello there. Quick. Come here. You're here just in time. The warp train is about to leave and, well, you know, once it leaves, we have all the time in the world to discuss, if you know what I mean. Haha. Discuss what, you ask? Well, we're going to talk about the wind behind these trains that only take 10 seconds to get to your destination. W-Core. Or, I guess if I were to be extra specific here, today we're talking about the W-Core identities, and along with that, the abnormality that is in relation to W-Core itself, Wayward Passenger, cause why not? It's been a while since I last talked about an abnormality, and ironically enough, there is one abnormality about W-Cores, so why not talk about the W-Core abnormality in a W-Core related video? And plus, it's a nice combo for me to make an ID video and an abnormality video in one single video. And that's it, I guess. Now, all that we need to do is...
승객 여러분, 모두 안전벨트를 착용해 주시기 바랍니다.
Here we go. Now that the train's starting to leave and enter a separate dimension, let's first talk about the W-Core IDs, shall we? After all, we practically have all the time in the world here in this separate dimension. And here we are. Seeing that there are no windows here on the trains, would have been very interesting to see how this parallel dimension actually looks like, but whatever. Now, as of right now, there are currently 7, and soon to be 8, W-Core IDs that we currently have in Limbus, which are W-Core.D.E.D.R, Faust, Merceau, Ryoshu, Hanlo, Yi-san, Otis, and in a couple hours after the video is released, Heathcliff. Now, me personally, I'm a bit mixed on these IDs. Like, sure, I do like a good majority of them, but I also dislike some others as well. Especially W-Core Merceau. Like, Jesus Christ, what an ID. And their ID stories aren't necessarily interesting in particular, compared to others at least in my opinion, but they're not really bad at least, I will say. So, without wasting any more time, let's start with W.D.D.E.D.R. W-Core.D.E.D.R is cute as shit, until you get her up to tree, that is, in which she becomes a bit more depressed. Although, then again, it is a sort of trend that she has with her other IDs, so it's not too special, I guess. Now, when it comes to her ID story, it's alright-ish. If there is one thing that I do like about it, is that it shows the reactions of the newcomers of W-Core when they learn the truth of what's actually happening in the trains. At least the common reaction. So, the ID story starts off with Dawn asking questions to her senior, Faust, about the warp trains, very passionately, asking things such as, is it a verity that first-class passengers are provided with an apparative from the vacuum cellar in 17-dimensional warp space, and whether or not warp trains take roundabout paths across their outskirts so as to prevent crashes during high-speed travel? Faust says no to both of these questions and stops her, saying that Dawn will see the train itself soon, hopefully answering some of these questions that she has. And as Dawn becomes excited at the thought of seeing those trains firsthand, she learns the violent and dark truth of these trains, and is extremely shocked by all of that. Faust finishes the story off saying, I won't stop you from having fantasies, Ms. Don Quixote. Just please keep in mind that reality may not quite align with them. Overall, as I said, it's alright. Not much else to say there, to be quite honest. Oh, other than the fact that it's quite sad that we don't have a W-Core Rodian, along with a couple other IDs that were never made into actual playable IDs that you can see from time to time. Oh well, moving on now. Faust's story is meh. It's just her talking to someone about W-Core singularities. Maybe it's the Gesellschaft, maybe. But then again, it can also be that she's just a spy hired by someone in this world to learn about W-Core secrets. But other than that though, I guess it would be quite interesting to know a small bit about W-Core, if you know almost nothing about it, that is. But as someone who knows just enough about it, it's quite boring and doesn't do much other than shown that Faust is probably a traitor to W-Core in this world. Maybe. And hopefully we get to see what the consequences of that. But anyways, on to Merceau. Now, I did say that Faust's ID story is meh, but Merceau's is actually fucking horrible. I know Merceau doesn't talk much, but in here, he only speaks twice. He only has 2 sentences. His other ID stories actually have him speak a bunch, but not this one apparently. No. This ID story is just 2 co-workers gossiping about Merceau, about how obedient he is to his work, not saying a single complaint, while Merceau swings his axe and doesn't really mind the gossip gossip since it doesn't affect him and his work, and that's it. Yep, that's it. I know it's meant to represent Merceau and his want, quote unquote, to stay focused on his work and do nothing else, but like, really? That's it? Bruh. Now, at the very least from now on, the stories are going to be a tad bit more interesting and better now, which thank God for that. Now here's a fun fact. W.D.E.D.R Ryoshu was my first ever 000 ID that I have ever got in the game, and it's also the first ID story that I've ever read. So I do have a bit of a bias towards her, but I do think that overall this ID is pretty good, along with the ID story as well. It's nice and it's also introspective in a way, since it covers what her idea of art is. In the ID story, she thinks that warp trains are museums, an exhibition featuring brand new pieces of art every single day. All that for a bit of physical labor. This Ryoshu was originally looking for a job and accepted a contract from W.D.E.D.R as a cleanup worker. She initially thought that obviously since W.D.E.D.R is a massive wing, there might be some things that need to be cleaned up here and there, and she needed a job while figuring out how to expand more on her art. But after being hired, she's surprised to know the truth of the trains. Not like Dawn, who was disgusted or something like that. She was quite pleased actually by this truth. While I was impressed with how well they were hiding this truth from the public, 3 words came to mind. This is it. In hindsight, I was so absorbed with chasing after and creating my own art that I neglected to appreciate the art of others. She was ashamed by this realization, but she accepts it because this incredibly violent scenery looked very good to her. I saw one that used its soft tissues to conjoin 2 train cars, becoming a new door between them. One that wrapped its flesh around the plush side of the seat, embodying a new chair with extra cushioning. One that is an amalgam of many, taking the shape of a new organism and lurching on. So on and so forth. Oh, but then again, she doesn't really consider that last Love Town-like amalgamation as art. At least not yet, since this art was made without intent after all. But despite that fact though, she doesn't really like butchering them and ruining the incomplete art either way. She also likes the gear that was given to her, along with the sword that she likes to call the Dimensional Demon Edge, which is incredibly edgy and good for her. But as she is an L3 employee, she is kind of sad that she needs to babysit these rookies as ordered by her higher-ups, and feels like she is missing out on seeing more of W.D.E.D.R.'s art. This is quite a cool ID story, talking more about Ryoshu and her want to make art. Now eventually I'll talk more about her artistic view and a bit more when I talk about Ryoshu when Count to 9 comes around in a bit, but that's not happening for a little while, so yeah, keep in mind of that. Cool ID though still. Hanlu's ID story is good for its time, I'll say. This ID more so focuses on Hanlu's lack of satisfaction with working here, coasting along and giving little thought to the kind of work he did. Now, of course, Hanlu didn't decide to work here in the first place. The elders decided that for him, of course. For entertainment reasons, I imagine. But it's not like this Hanlu didn't have any sort of interest in this job. It's more like he wanted to do something different each day. The child was probably tired of doing what was essentially the same work day after day. Hell, he's even a bit jealous of Ryoshu, who joined W.D.E.D.R at the same time as him and was given a more interesting job than whatever he's doing because, well, she's an L3 employee while he is an L2 employee. But at the end of the day though, none of that mattered to the child, however, because he didn't need to, nor did he want to be acknowledged. See what I mean when I say this story is good for its time? Before Kanto 8, I imagine this story would have been a sort of eye-opener to who Hanlu is as a character, but now that Kanto 8 is out and everyone's done it, the story's just fine, I guess. At least it covers some real problems in life beyond just what we know of Hanlu, such as the day-to-day monotony of working an office job, though that's something. Yisan's ID story is just him writing poetry about how fucking tired he is working in W.D.E.D.R, to the point that he begins hallucinating his death in one of the warp trains and almost convincing himself that he is inside one of the carriages, until he's reminded by an announcement that he's going to work as always. And that's it. Yeah, if you can't tell, I don't really like this one too much. I feel like this ID story is as long as it is because of him rambling on and on in poetry language about how tired he is, and could have just been a tad bit shorter in my opinion. But then again, it's not the worst ID story in existence, so whatever. Also comes to show that some of of the employees of W.D.E.D.R are overworked as shit, I'm guessing. There were hints of that in Ryoshu's story, but Isan spells it out completely. Anyways, on to the last ID story for today. Otis's ID story is interesting for the simple reason that she did not come out on release or on season 1 like the other W.D.E.D.R IDs, but during the Warp Express intervallo, which is around the time when Project Moon started putting more effort, I guess, into expanding more on what's actually going on in these mirror worlds. And I imagine Heathcliff's ID story will expand more on these events in the W.D.E.D.R mirror world, such as the reason as to why an L4 employee is being sent out. Maybe something happened in Otis's story to cause that, or is he going to have an individual event that requires an L4 employee instead? Let's see. We start this story off with 3 W.D.E.D.R employees entering a hollow train through a portal. It was originally going to be used for training new recruits, but apparently the train is not covered with the usual suicidal types, explaining that if the passengers have retained enough sense to barricade themselves behind the train doors, then it is likely that they also retain a degree of intelligence. It is quite rare, after all, that the train passengers here would survive for thousands of years and still have a certain degree of sanity and intelligence to make a kingdom of blood with its own rules and the like. Otis believed that this is too much for any new recruit to handle, so she sent herself along with Isan and Ryoshu to deal with this kingdom themselves. Now while they're doing that, they start a conversation about the fact that apparently the trains have recently started becoming more unique and weirder, just like this one, and that's mostly because the economy seat prices have been slashed and have become cheaper, which eventually led to more passengers of the economy seats, and more passengers equals more bad apples among the bunch. So like criminals, fixers, etc. Right. But also, along with the cheaper tickets, there have also been some delays in train arrivals as well, ruining the 10-second arrival reputation that W.D.E.D.R has. Ryoshu assumes that it has something to do with the incident that all the workers were ordered to not talk about, this incident being the first-class passengers incident that we see in Library of Ruina, where the first-class passengers, who were in hibernation, eventually became puppets to a certain distortion a few years ago, failing to guarantee the safety of the first class, and thus the profits fell off after that. But Otis shuts the entire conversation down and the 3 get to work. With Otis in command as the captain, he was able to give clear orders to the 2 employees that had certain preferences and specializations in their work, and thus were able to get through multiple train cars much faster than expected. So after a little break, they have suddenly been ambushed, but Otis easily kills the passenger covered in bones, and the 3 employees try to fight off the ambush. The story finishes itself off with Otis, after quickly reading a warp train ad about them taking 10 seconds to anywhere, says the following: "No matter how much labor upon labor I endure, I can't seem to go back, not in 10 years, let alone 10 seconds. The return journey is always so far and so unforgiven." Now this last line that Otis gave certainly has something to do with Otis's mysterious past. A couple of her IDs, from what I've noticed, had something to do with her returning to somewhere. Now I have not read the Odyssey, but I can tell that Otis, who probably worked the hardest amongst the sinners, wished to eventually return home and rest. But her duties remain on top of everything, so she believes that she's not allowed to rest, not yet at least, until she completes her goal and return journey. But then again, I am assuming this from what little I know about Otis's past and whatnot, so take what I said about that with a grain of salt. Unless you have more information to give, then please do that. Thank you. And there you go. Done with the IDs. From what we have read about Otis's ID story, I think Heathcliff's ID story is certainly going to be quite interesting, since if he has nothing to do with Otis, at the very least we now know that the trains have been getting weirder and more complex as more faction-like trains have been appearing. So I guess the ID story will be focusing on Heathcliff dealing with a congested compartment, since these are going to start appearing on the trains now, I'm guessing. But we'll have to wait and see. Now if this were just a video on a couple IDs, the video would have ended here, but I also said that I will talk about the W.D.E.D.R Abnormality Wayward Passenger a couple of minutes ago, and hoo boy, It's quite interesting to say the least. So let's get through it, shall we? Oh boy, it's been a while since I talked about an abnormality. Well, I started off again? Oh yeah, T-02-21-07 is a He4 level abnormality that is incredibly sick looking. It's obviously meant to represent the mutilated and dark secret that W.D.D.E.D.R's trains hold with its violent and gory look, but it's more than just that secret. It also represents the feeling of being lost and alone. As its mirror dungeon event states, you see a poor passenger stranded between dimensions. Most will never realize that this person ever disappeared. Well, the transport company would know, but they'll simply pretend that the passenger never existed. Lost and abandoned, tossed out like trash, having no place left in the city. Now, from the options that you were given, you do figure out that this so-called passenger is not actually a passenger, but rather a W.D.E.D.R employee, who, according to one of the options, was just patrolling the area, doing its job. Yeah, right, I certainly believe that. It's not like the employee has been abandoned as well, right? Like, come on, why would it follow us or even go to the direction where we point at if it was just patrolling the area? Yeah, I doubt that. So, in my opinion, the point still stands that no matter if the abnormality is a passenger or an employee, it's been left alone and is lost and will take anything as a way to get back home or wherever else it wants to go. Now, using that thought process, the representation of being lost and going back to where you belong really fits the three characters that have its ego, Dimension Shredder, those being Yi-san, Han-Lu, and Otis. Yi-san's Dimension Shredder is meant to represent the loss that he had felt after the League of Nine fell, and his wandering that he had with the mirror, hence the reason for the quote of enchanting colors. The mirror was enchanting to him, so he relied on the mirror to find his way back. At least that's what I assume is what this ego is meant to represent. Han-Lu was in a similar position as Yi-san, lost in the clouds, bound in a single pace, yet capable of moving to the next world, just waiting for someone to point him in the right direction, I suppose. Just like what Jatsu did for him in Kanto A. Now, Otis is a more interesting case since she isn't necessarily lost like the other two, but rather she's focused on the path that she has made. She is quite confident that whatever path she takes and makes, it will eventually lead her back home. But at the end of the day though, these paths lead to nowhere, so still, she is lost in her own way, I guess. Again, I don't really know enough about the Odyssey to get a concrete answer for why Otis has that ego, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case because of what the ID says. Oh, and speaking of IDs, did you know that both the Wayward Passenger and the ego's energy blades change depending on the weapon the person is using in their W-Core IDs? Yi-san has a dagger, Han-Lu has a spear, and Otis has gauntlets. Pretty cool, I'd say. But hey, we're all done here now, so if you're going to pull for W-Core Heathcliff and Bloodfiend Merceau, then good luck on that, I guess, since I'm not pulling for them, because after the Warp rerun is done, the second Wellperkers of the season is coming, so that's something. I'm guessing it's going to be either some general guests from the library that we know, maybe Hanafuda and Alan, since they appear in Kanto 8, and this Wellperkers does not have a story, if I remember correctly, which is sad, I guess. But I can also see some finger IDs being here, like the thumb and the index, since, well, Kanto 9 is coming in a bit, so why not hype it up with some fingers, I guess. But oh well, we'll see what happens when the Wellperkers comes, so bye!